Who could take a 6-year-old boy and murder him and decapitate him? Who? We needed to know.
For 27 years, John Walsh asked one question. Who could take a 6-year-old boy, murder him, and decapitate him? Who? We needed to know, he said. We needed to know. In December of 2008, standing at a podium inside the very police department that had spent decades failing to answer him, he finally said the other half of that sentence out loud. And today, we know. A warning to our viewers, what you are about to watch is a true story. The following program contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Crimeview Central. This is a case that took 27 years to officially close, and to this day, there are people who study it and believe it was never truly solved at all. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. If you're new here, hit like and subscribe. That's what keeps us digging into cases like this one. Now, back to Hollywood, Florida, July 1981. Before we go any further, you need to know who Adam Walsh was. Not the case, not the headline, not the laws that carry his name, the child. Adam John Walsh was born on the 14th of November, 1974, in the summer of 1981. He was 6 years old. Sandy blonde hair, hazel eyes, a small freckled face. He loved baseball, and he loved to draw. On Saturday mornings, he watched television the way 6-year-olds do, fully absorbed, the rest of the world disappearing. He called his mother Mommy, and he was shy. This is the detail that matters most, so hold on to it. Not a performed attention-seeking shyness, but a real and gentle quietness. The kind that made him hesitate around strangers. The kind that made him wait and watch before he trusted a new face. His parents understood this about him. It was simply who their son was. It had never once put him in danger. On the day he disappeared, it would cost him everything. His father, John Walsh, was a successful marketing executive working in Miami, a man building hotels and a career and a life. His mother, Reve, was raising Adam at the center of what looked, from the outside, like the whole of the American dream, a good home, a thriving family. An only child, loved without reservation, the son the entire household orbited. On the afternoon of the 27th of July, 1981, Reve took Adam on an errand so ordinary it should have vanished from memory the moment it ended. She drove him to the Sears at the Hollywood Mall, a sprawling, busy department store in the middle of an ordinary suburban shopping center. She was there to ask about a lamp that had gone on sale. They walked in through the north entrance. Just inside, Adam found something that stopped him cold. A kiosk displaying Atari 2600 video games, with several older boys clustered around it, taking turns at the controllers. In 1981, for a 6-year-old, this was not a toy. It was a window into another world, glowing under the store's fluorescent lights. His whole face lit up. Reve made the calculation that millions of reasonable parents made in that era, on that kind of afternoon, in that kind of store. It was the middle of the day. The place was full of employees and shoppers. She would only be a short distance away, a few aisles over, asking about a lamp. She left Adam at the kiosk with the other boys and went to the lamp department. She finished her business there at around 15 inches the afternoon. When she came back to the kiosk, every boy was gone. Adam was gone. What had happened in those few minutes would not be fully understood for years, and even now, parts of it remain a matter of inference. A store manager told Reve that a scuffle had broken out among the boys over whose turn it was at the games, and that a security guard had ordered the children to leave the store. The guard, by the account that emerged, asked the older boys whether their parents were in the store. They said no, and Adam, 6 years old, almost certainly afraid he was in trouble, too shy to speak up and explain that his mother was just a few aisles away, was swept along with them. His parents would later piece together what they believed happened. The guard, presuming Adam was with the older boys, sent the whole group out the same door, and Adam ended up outside the Sears at an exit he did not know, in a part of the parking lot he had never seen. After the other boys scattered in their own directions, a small, shy boy, alone, outside, at a door he didn't recognize. Inside, Reve was searching. She had Adam paged over the store's public address system. His name went out across the building, asking him to come to the front, and there was no answer. By sheer coincidence, she ran into her mother-in-law, Jean, who joined the search, the two women moving through the aisles, checking and rechecking, calling his name. They searched and paged for more than 90 minutes. At 1:55 the afternoon, Reve finally called the Hollywood police. By then, Adam Walsh had already been gone for the better part of 2 hours, and the most important window in any abduction, those first crucial minutes, had closed without anyone outside that store even knowing a child was missing. This case took 27 years to officially close. This channel takes weeks for each story, real records, real families, real failures. If Adam's story is sitting with you, hit like and subscribe. That's how Crime View Central keeps going and keeps cases like this one from being forgotten. Stay with us. What followed was, by almost any honest accounting, one of the most poorly handled investigations in modern American history, and the failures began before anyone even knew there had been a murder. This was 1981, and the country was, in retrospect, almost defenseless against a crime like this. There were no Amber Alerts. There was no National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The FBI was largely barred from involvement in a missing child case without specific evidence that a state line had been crossed or a ransom demanded. Most stunningly of all, missing children were not even being entered into the FBI's National Crime Database, the same system that tracked stolen cars and stolen guns. A stolen vehicle had a place in the national computer. A missing 6-year-old did not. John and Reve believed, then and for the rest of their lives, that the Hollywood Police Department botched both halves of this case. First the search for a missing child, and then the hunt for a killer. The department was a modest suburban force, with no real experience handling a case of this kind or this magnitude. Critical early hours bled away, and the parents, refusing to simply wait, began doing the work themselves, printing and distributing flyers by the hundreds of thousands, raising a reward that eventually reached $100,000, the equivalent of well over $300,000 today, and pleading with the press to keep their son's face in front of the public. 2 weeks after Adam vanished, on the morning of the 11th of August, 1981, John and Reve Walsh went on national television, still saying they hoped their son was alive, still asking for his safe return. They did not yet know that the answer had already surfaced, almost literally, 130 miles to the north. The day before, on August 10th, a severed head had been found in a drainage canal alongside Highway 60 near Vero Beach in rural Indian River County, discovered by a detective from the Indian River County Sheriff's Office and a deputy. Divers from 2 counties searched the canal. The next morning, while Adam's parents were on television hoping aloud for his return, the remains were being identified. They belonged to Adam. The coroner determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation. The condition of the remains indicated that Adam had died several days before his head was found, meaning within a day or two of the abduction. He had not been kept alive. He never had a chance. The rest of his body was never recovered. Because the remains were evidence, the Walsh family was forced to bury their son with an empty casket, standing over a box that held nothing of him. The head itself remained in a morgue, held as evidence, until the case was closed in 2008. That is a detail John Walsh would only speak about publicly decades later, one of the many private cruelties this case inflicted on the people who loved Adam most. The investigation that followed compounded every early mistake with new ones. When a child is murdered, the statistics point, overwhelmingly, towards someone close to the family, and so investigators began there, as they had to. Both John and Reve Walsh cooperated fully. The early months consumed enormous energy on theories involving the family's inner circle, theories that ultimately went nowhere while whatever trail the actual killer had left grew colder by the day. Over the years, more than a dozen names moved through the case file. Most were eliminated quickly. But 2 names would come to dominate the story, and one of them is among the most infamous in American criminal history. Every case on this channel is weeks of digging. Real records, real documents, real lives. If this story is landing, take a second and hit like and subscribe. It keeps us going. And now, back to the two men whose names would shadow this case for decades. The first name was Jeffrey Dahmer. In 1991, when Dahmer was arrested in Wisconsin and the full horror of his crimes became public, people who had been in South Florida in the summer of 1981 began to come forward. Dahmer, it turned out, had been living in Miami Beach at the time of Adam's murder, and according to reports that drew widespread attention, 2 eyewitnesses placed him at the Hollywood Mall on the very day Adam was abducted. One described seeing a strange man walking into the toy department. The other reported seeing a young blonde man with a protruding chin throwing a struggling child into a blue van and speeding away. The delivery business where Dahmer worked at the time was reported to have had a blue van. When photographs of Dahmer appeared in the newspapers after his arrest, both witnesses said they recognized him as the man they had seen. Dahmer's own modus operandi was chilling in its relevance. He preyed on young males. He decapitated his victims. And when he was interviewed about Adam Walsh in 1992, he denied involvement. But he denied it in a way some found revealing. "I've told you everything," he said. "How I killed them, how I cooked them, who I ate. Why wouldn't I tell you if I did it to someone else?" It has since been reported that Dahmer may have feared he would be killed in prison, as those who harm children often are, if he confessed to murdering a small boy. But the case against him was never proven, and crucially, John Walsh himself eventually stated that he had seen no evidence linking his son's abduction and murder to Dahmer's crimes. The Dahmer theory remains one of the great unresolved threads of this case, compelling to some, dismissed by others, including, in the end, Adam's own father. Because there was another name, and it was the one that never went away: Ottis Toole. Ottis Toole was a drifter, an arsonist, and a confessed serial killer. He was a close associate of Henry Lee Lucas, and the two of them, traveling together through the early 1980s, confessed to or implicated themselves in more than 200 homicides across the country. That staggering number is precisely what made them so difficult to believe. Investigators came to understand that Toole and Lucas would confess to almost anything. Most of Lucas's confessions were later shown to be false, coerced, and shaped by Texas Rangers feeding him details. A 2019 documentary on the pair showed footage of Toole himself apparently being fed information by interrogators and confessing to crimes he had nothing to do with. So when Toole confessed to abducting and killing Adam Walsh, investigators had every reason for caution. And his confession was, in many respects, deeply flawed. He confessed, then recanted, then confessed again, the story shifting each time. At one point, he named Henry Lee Lucas as his accomplice, but Lucas was demonstrably elsewhere, locked up, at the time of Adam's murder. Confronted with that, Toole changed his account and said he had acted alone. But Toole also provided details that genuinely unsettled the people working the case. He described luring Adam into his white 1971 Cadillac, a car with a damaged right bumper, with promises of toys and candy. He said he drove the boy north, that Adam, docile at first, began to panic, that he struck him, then drove to a deserted service road in St. Lucie County, just north of the Raidbaugh Road overpass off the Florida Turnpike. He described strangling Adam with a seatbelt when he realized the boy was still breathing, then decapitating him with a machete. He even described what he claimed he did with the body afterward, back in Jacksonville. He said, in one account, that he had wanted to make Adam his own adopted son, but that it had not been possible. His description of how Adam was killed was consistent with the autopsy. Several witnesses placed Toole in the Hollywood area in the days before Adam disappeared, and at his home in Jacksonville, investigators reported finding a pair of green shorts and a sandal, similar to what Adam had been wearing the day he was taken. Then came the failures that would scar this case permanently. The 1971 Cadillac that Toole said he had used was examined, and blood was reportedly found inside it, though its source could never be conclusively identified. But the investigation lost the blood-stained carpet from that car. It lost the machete said to have been the murder weapon, and eventually it lost the car itself. The single most important pieces of physical evidence, the items that in a later era might have produced a definitive forensic answer, were simply gone, misplaced in a system that failed Adam at nearly every turn. In 1997, 16 years after the murder, a new Hollywood police chief named Rick Stone, a veteran of the Dallas and Wichita police departments, conducted an exhaustive review of the case after the release of John Walsh's book. Stone examined the evidence, including the taped interrogations of Toole. His conclusion was that the evidence showed, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Ottis Toole had murdered Adam. Stone, like others, noted the central frustration of the entire case, that both Toole and Lucas were notorious for confessing to crimes and then taking it all back. Toole was never charged in Adam's murder. On the 15th of September 1996, he died in a Florida prison of liver failure at the age of 49, while serving a life sentence for other crimes. No relative came forward to claim his body. He was buried on prison grounds. But before he died, according to John Walsh, Toole's niece visited him, and she later told the family that her uncle had confessed to her on his deathbed that he had killed Adam. To some who have studied the case, that confession carries a weight the others do not, precisely because of when it came. At the very end, with no jury to perform for, no attention to gain, nothing left to win, he is said to have admitted it anyway. On the 16th of December 2008, Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner held a press conference. Adam's parents were in the room. Reve Walsh placed a small photograph of her son on the podium, where everyone could see him. Wagner announced that the case was officially closed and that, following an external review, the department was satisfied that Ottis Toole was the man who had murdered Adam. He acknowledged the long list of investigative failures. His agency, he admitted, had spent an inordinate amount of time chasing other potential suspects rather than focusing on Toole, who, he said, had always been their only real suspect. And he apologized to the Walsh family for the mistakes of the past, the lost evidence, the squandered years, the chance to put Ottis Toole in front of a jury while he was still alive to face one. But honesty requires that the asterisk on this closure be stated plainly, because it is the heart of why the case still provokes argument. There was no new evidence. There was no DNA. There was no trial. A review of the documents released that day showed there was nothing that, standing entirely on its own, conclusively pointed to Toole. No forensic match. No unassailable eyewitness. The case was declared closed based on a re-examination of everything that already existed, and a department's decision to finally state aloud what John Walsh had insisted upon for 27 years. John Walsh rose and spoke.
For 27 years, we've been asking, who could take a 6-year-old boy and murder him and decapitate him? Who? We needed to know.
And today, we know. The not knowing, he said, had been a torture. But that journey was over. The case is closed. Whether it is truly solved is something nearly everyone who reads the full file ends up deciding for themselves. And yet the most important part of Adam Walsh's story is not how it ended in that police station in 2008. It is what his parents built out of their grief, while the case was still open, while no one had been charged, while the system that should have protected their son was failing them at every level. They turned their worst nightmare into the machinery that would spare other families from living it. In 1984, in part because of the relentless advocacy of the Walshes and other parents of missing children, Congress passed the Missing Children's Assistance Act, which led to the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, an organization that has since assisted in the recovery of hundreds of thousands of children. The exact gap John had raged about, the absence of any national system to look for a missing child, began to close because of his fury and his refusal to let it stand. A 1,983 television film about Adam's case was watched by 38 million people on its first airing, and each broadcast was followed by photographs and descriptions of missing children, along with a hotline, a combination credited with bringing more than a dozen missing children home. John Walsh went on to host America's Most Wanted, a program that ran for more than 2 decades and helped capture more than 1,000 fugitives. Department stores across the country adopted what became known as a Code Adam alert, a building-wide lockdown procedure when a child goes missing inside, named in memory of a boy who walked out an unfamiliar exit and never came back. And in 2006, federal legislation bearing Adam's name strengthened the National Registry of Offenders Against Children and increased penalties for crimes against the young. There is a more complicated part of this legacy too, and it deserves to be told honestly. The enormous publicity around Adam's case, and around the film, helped fuel what came to be called the missing children panic of the mid-1980s, a period of widespread fear over stranger abductions. Early estimates suggested as many as 20,000 children a year were being taken by strangers, a figure later shown to be dramatically inflated. In reality, the overwhelming majority of child abductions involved family members, and the number of true stranger abductions was a tiny fraction of what the public came to fear. A criminologist later observed that the case helped create a nation of frightened children and anxious parents, reshaping American childhood itself. That, too, is part of what Adam's death set in motion, an unintended consequence of a country suddenly, painfully awake to a danger it had never reckoned with. But strip all of it away, the laws, the television, the debates, the decades of argument over who really did it, and what remains is a child. He was 6 years old. He was shy. He called his mother Mommy. He watched cartoons on Saturday mornings. He loved baseball, and he loved to draw. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, he stood at a video game kiosk with a group of older boys. His whole face lit up, and when his mother told him she'd be just a few aisles away, he was too quiet, too gentle, too trusting of a world that should have been safe, to call out when a stranger sent him toward a door he didn't know. Adam Walsh walked out of that store and never came home. Everything that followed, every law signed, every fugitive captured, every child returned to a family that had nearly given up hope, began in that silence, in that empty space at the kiosk, in a name paged over a loudspeaker, with no one left to answer. His life was cut off at 6 years old. His legacy is the hundreds of thousands of children who came home because two grieving parents refused to let his death mean nothing. Adam's story carries a lesson worth holding on to long after this video ends. Know where your children are. Teach them that it is never wrong to speak up, never wrong to ask an adult for help, never wrong to say that something feels wrong. Teach them that being shy should never mean being silent when they're afraid. And if you ever see a child standing alone and frightened in a public place, don't assume someone else will step in. That moment of attention, that one phone call, could be the thing that changes everything. If this case stayed with you, and it should, hit like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Crime View Central, we'll see you in the next one. And remember, no case stays cold forever.